have got some onion, some garlic, some tomato paste, which lots of you come to lots of my classes and you will know I make a tomato sauce all the time that has a can of aroma tomatoes. I'm using San Marzano. There they are, DOP, which means denomination of origin protected. And I do this all the time with just tomato, basil, and some garlic and a little bit of chili. I'm adding tomato paste today, and that's for the intensity, the richness of the sauce. It's going to add a lot of flavor. Also, if you want to add some herbs other than basil in here, guys, feel free to do that. You could get oregano into this. You could get some parsley in. So definitely add some different herbs if you like to. I'm going basil today. So I've called for half a small onion. I've got quite a small onion, so honestly, I might use the whole thing. I like to use a big pan for making this because it's going to cook faster. You don't have to, but I like to use something with a wide base just for the speed of making it. So if you use a shallower pan, it's just going to take a lot longer for it to reduce. But with a wide pan like mine, you do need to be mindful of not burning your onion when we get started with that. So grab yourselves a knife and let's start with our onion. So lots of you have done this with me a million times, but in case you haven't, cut off the outside of the root, cut off the stem, cut your onion in half, peel it, and then it doesn't actually matter how fine we dice this really, because we're going to blend it. I'm going to do mine in a blender. If you've got a stick blender, you can use that too. You don't have to blend it if you don't want to. If you want a chunky sauce, that's totally fine too. If you're going to do that, if you're going to do it unblended, I would cut your onion fairly fine. And I'm going to cut mine fairly fine anyway, but you don't have to if you're blending it. So chopping my onion, I'm just slicing in towards the root with my slices nice and close together because I'm chopping it finely. And as I said, I've got a pretty small onion, so I'm going to use the whole onion here. Now I'm going to get my knife and do a horizontal slice, angled down towards the root a little bit, and then take my knife and just cut in the other direction just to finely dice. So let's do our garlic prep also while we're at this. We'll get everything ready to go. So here's my garlic. I've got 2 cloves of garlic, and I'm just going to finely chop them. So to do that, just slice them first. You could use more garlic if you love garlic. It would be totally fine. And then just rough chop it. Here's my basil. So I'm just going to get a couple of sprigs. I don't need to do a ton into the sauce, just a little handful. So like so. And then let's look at the tomatoes. I have not opened my can. I'm using these San Marzano. You do not have to do that. Any Roma tomatoes will be totally fine. In the summertime, use fresh tomatoes too. At this time of year, they're not as great for sauces, but in the summer, they're wonderful. I'm not going to chop them or anything, guys. I often use a potato masher in my pot to mash them down, or use the back of a spoon. But if you prefer, rather than making a mess on your cutting board, you could just get them into a bowl and get your hands in there and crush them with your hands before they go into the pot. So I tend to do one or the other. I'll get them in a bowl, crush them with my hands, or I'll mash them with a potato masher in my pot. Either way, it breaks them up really nicely without having to empty them onto a cutting board and have juices going everywhere, which is no fun. So I'm going to turn on my pot for my sauce. So I'm going for kind of a medium heat. And I'm going to get some olive oil into here. And I've been fairly generous with my olive oil. In the recipe, I have called for, I've just said extra virgin olive oil. I want a nice coating on the base of my pan, and then I'm just gonna cook it out I'm gonna warm it until it's shimmering. And then once it's shimmering, we'll move our onions into there, and we will season it with a pinch of salt and just cook our onions before anything else goes in. The other thing, mine isn't even sizzling yet, so I'll turn it up. The other thing I mentioned is getting some chili in here. That's optional. So if you're using a fresh chili, just chop it up, guys. If you are using a fresh chili and you want to make it milder, take the seeds and membranes out. If you want the heat, keep them in. I'm being very Italian today and using chili flakes, which are here. I have my standard issue chili flakes. My onion's just starting to sizzle. Add that pinch of salt. What it does is brings the essential oils or the oils out of your onion and the moisture. So it helps them start to soften because it brings the moisture out, adding salt, and it also flavors it. So we're just going to stay with our onions for a little bit until they're softened, so maybe 3 minutes. And at this point, you can add your chili in, guys, but not your garlic yet. Because if we add our garlic now, it's going to get overcooked. It's going to brown too much. I like chili, so I've added a generous pinch. You don't have to add that much, or you can add more. The chili is based on your palate, how spicy you like it. Once they're softened, that's when the garlic's going to go in, along with the basil leaves, and then we'll cook those out till they're fragrant, which will be about 1 minute. And then after that goes the tomato paste, and then finally the tomatoes themselves. My onion is softening up really nicely. It'll keep cooking with the tomatoes. I can smell the chili. So next, let's get our garlic in with our onions. And like I said, you can throw the basil in now. And my garlic is already fragrant, so I'm going to get my tablespoonful, and I'm not measuring it, about a tablespoonful of tomato paste into there. If you like the intensity of tomato paste, use a bit more. And just stir that in. It's always important to cook tomato paste before you add the next ingredient. It's also important not to overcook it because it ends up getting like a burnt flavor to it. But cook it out. Make sure it's nicely combined with your onion. Once it is, you could start to smell it. Then in with your can of tomatoes. They should sizzle like mine as they hit the pot. I'm adding the tomatoes and the juices. The whole lot are in there. And then, as I mentioned, I do like to use a potato masher. Just to break up my tomatoes a bit. It's the perfect tool for doing this. Okay. So at this point, you can turn your sauce to a low simmer. It doesn't need to be going hard. We've got a little time for it to cook away and for those flavors to develop really nicely before we puree it. So just add a low simmer. It'll reduce a little bit. If it looks to you like it's reducing too much, put a lid on it. I'm leaving it uncovered for now. So I just need it to get up to a simmer before I turn it down and let it do its thing. You can give it a taste for seasoning if you want to. Just remember that it's going to reduce, so you don't want to over-season it at this point because it'll end up too salty. So I am going to get a little salt. The other trick that people sometimes do, it's completely optional, is to add a pinch of sugar to tomato sauces. With canned tomatoes and winter tomatoes, they can be quite acidic. So if you add a pinch of sugar, it can actually balance that out and make them taste a little riper. So that's certainly an option also. Okay, so my tomatoes are at a nice simmer. I'm turning them down. I can taste the intensity of that tomato paste in there, but I didn't overdo it, so it's not overwhelming. And it deepens the color of my sauce also, because it's got that intense red color to it, which is really lovely. And it adds a sweetness. Mine is nicely reduced. I'm going to turn it off. It's ready to puree. So I'm going to just give it a taste. It's very tasty. We'll re-season it once it's pureed. So I'm just going to turn it off and set it aside. We're going to get it into a blender. So I have a blender over here, or like I said, use your stick blender. If you want less dishes, you got a stick blender, just blend it in the pot. It is totally fine. I'm going to go smooth. Okay. So I'm going to transfer it back into a pot and just keep it warm. I might reduce it a little bit. It's quite nice and thick though. It's very tasty.